delighted to have you tonight, so thank you. As you know, we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Andrew Smalling, who is running for the sheriff 2020 for Broward County.
That's correct.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm Dawn Wilson. Welcome. Nice to have you. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Where would you like me to start?
Who you are.
All right. Well, my name is Andrew Smalling, as you mentioned. I am running for sheriff in 2020. The primary is very important. The primary is in August 25th to be exact, 2020. And we have a lot of contenders that are in the race this year. So it's going to be contentious, and that's why it's important for people to come out and vote in the primary.
Okay.
Don't wait till the general election in November, because then, all the decisions would have been made. But about me, I am 58 years old. I'll be 58 on my next birthday in March. I am a product of the island of Jamaica.
Woohoo, Jamaica!
Jamaica.
I was born in Jamaica. I left Jamaica when I was young. I was 8 years old. And my parents immigrated to New York, and that's the reason why I left. Really, before leaving Jamaica, my dad left before. My father was in the military, and he was in the Army, and he left. He was in Vietnam, and he actually came up from Jamaica to serve the United States in Vietnam. So we followed shortly thereafter, and I pretty much grew up in New York.
Where in New York?
In the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I went to, I guess that would be middle school, junior high school in New York, and high school in Queens. And then I came to Florida to go to college. So I went to college in Central Florida. Shortly after leaving college, I went to the Marine Corp.
Okay.
That's something I always wanted to do. I guess it was instilled in me from my dad, being in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the uniform. I
Well,
like the
I like the uniform too.
I like the uniform. And I didn't realize, they say the Marines, the few, the proud. And there's a reason why there's a few, because the training there is very tough.
Yeah.
Very tough. So I like to say that what I went through in the Marine Corps actually probably prepared me for a lot of the things that I do and have done.
Excellent.
So it instilled in me the discipline. And anyone that that I talk to, any young person that I talk to, and they have aspirations of going into the military, I always encourage them. Of course, there's the downside. You go to war, right? But it's the same thing in law enforcement, right? So when you join to be a police officer, you join a law enforcement department, there is that downside, that possibility that you may encounner gunfire. Sort of like what's going on right now in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
So it's hazardous, but I guess it takes a special person to do that. So after I served in the military for 5 years on active duty, I left active duty. I was still a reservist, and I joined. Actually, I went into when I left active duty with the Marine Corps. I went into the corporate world for a year. I worked with AT&T in their corporate security for a year. Should I be giving these people plugs? I just thought about that.
Well, it's part of your career path.
I worked with a corporate entity. It's too late now. I said it. But,
Can't pull it back.
I know, right? But I worked in their corporate security for a year, and then during that time, while I was working with corporate security, it gave me an opportunity to liaison with the police departments. It was here in Broward County. So I was doing security work with BSO, the Sheriff's Office, with Fort Lauderdale Police Department. So I got an idea of what they do, And it seemed like an interesting job, and it seemed like something that I would rather have done at that time than be in the corporate environment. So I started, asking some of the individuals that I encountered about how do you become a police officer, what are some of the things you have to do. And they pretty much set me on the path to spending 20 years with the sheriff's office.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. And
There are no words. No
I know,
words.
right?
thank you.
To thank you. There are no words to tell you how grateful and honored we are.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So
To have you
you
here.
are the right person, like Charlene is saying, to have this conversation with us and our viewers, because
you.
we do need your expertise for someone
sure.
so well-rounded.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for that.
Sure.
And for your family for sharing you with
That's
us
right.
tonight. And
That's
our
right.
hearts go out to all the police officers that put their lives at risk every day, especially
Yes.
those that are battling right now in Philadelphia. I think they just went to serve a warrant
Yes.
and it ended up in gunfire
Yeah, I
and
heard
six
there
officers.
were six officers that were shot. I don't know the extent of their injuries.
Yeah.
But supposedly the gunman is still there and is
Yeah.
still firing.
So it's just the
Yeah.
risk that police officers put themselves in law enforcement
Yeah.
every day,
Yeah.
and that
That's hazardous duty.
it is,
sure.
it is, and a lot of it you're probably not compensated a lot for what you do.
Correct.
And I always had this in my mind, like, they go on these drug busts and there's all this money,
Mhm.
and then you get paid minimal money,
Right.
that's why you have the temptation, because we're all humans, and you hear about a lot of police officers not doing the right thing or making the right choices. So
Right.
that's some of the conversation we might have with
Oh,
you
for sure.
today.
For sure. Integrity is important.
Yeah,
You
so
know.
one of the things that's at the top of everyone's mind right now is their kids going back to school,
For sure.
right?
Mhm.
I've looked at Facebook and everybody's like, prayers for my kids,
Right.
God protect my kids as they
Right.
go back to school. And there was this young 5-year-old child that just lost her life in the El Paso shooting.
Right.
She didn't lose her life. Both parents died.
Right.
And her thought was, or her question was, is this gunman going to come after me? Is this person going to come after me? So for all our children going back to school, all the parents are having anxiety, and all the mass shootings that are happening.
Mhm.
We have this fear about our kids. I went to the mall this weekend with my daughter, and I left her downstairs because she was taking forever to make a decision on shoes. And I went upstairs, and halfway up the escalator, I said to myself, if something happens, I'm nowhere near her to protect
Right.
her.
Right.
And I had to talk myself out of that fear that you have to move on with your life.
Exactly.
So all our kids from, there's no age group spared in
Mhm.
here
Mhm.
that are becoming victims. So what do you tell us as parents to kind of ease our minds, or what can we do to protect our children more?
Well, I think one of the largest problems we have in this country is our love of guns. I think that because we grew up, and when I say we grew up, I'm talking about the country itself, grew up with that gun mentality, the Westerns and all that kind of stuff, people carrying guns. I strongly believe that guns, especially the type of guns that we're seeing in mass shootings, AR-15s, things like that, strictly belong in the hands of the military and the police.
Right.
That's the way I believe. So I think it starts there with that, individuals who some say they're mentally deranged that do these mass shootings. I beg to differ, because I think some of these individuals are very intelligent and they know what they're doing, but because of whatever situations, whatever circumstances cause them to do what they do, whether it be hate or whether it be someone wronged them,
Right.
or they're suicidal, there's so many factors that go into that. So I think it starts there. I think we really need to start taking a lead as whether it's elected officials from the top on down, where we start really looking at how do we control access to these types of weapons.
Absolutely.
You know, I was watching them talk about Dayton, Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
where 26 people were shot,
Killed, yeah.
killed.
Mm-hmm.
They said that shooting happened in 32 seconds. All 26 people were shot in 32 seconds.
So 9 died and
9 died.
26 were
people
shot.
did, yeah, 26
were
people
shot.
did not die,
Yeah.
but 9 died. There were 9
26 were shot.
fatalities.
Right.
And those individuals were shot in
30 seconds, yeah.
32
Because
seconds
of the weapon.
because of the type of weapon. So I think that is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do personally to protect yourself and to look out for your welfare? First of all, you got to be aware of your surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important.
Yeah.
We're in a day and time where we have to know what's going on around us. We just can't take it for granted
Yeah.
that everything
Everything
is
is gonna
safe,
be all right.
everything is good.
Yeah.
We can't just leave our doors open. We can't just go to areas where there's large congregations. I mean, it's happening everywhere. You go to the movie theater, you go to the mall, you go to a concert, these are all gathering places, and you have to be more aware of your surroundings.
Know where the exits are. Know where the exits are.
Exactly.
That's
know
one
where
of the things that
are.
I tell my children. Make sure you know where the exits are. And they laugh at me.
Exactly.
They laugh at me because they
No.
don't think that this is that serious. And
That
I'm
is
like,
a serious
it
thing.
is.
That is
It
a serious
is.
thing. And they have I guess a philosophy when it comes to mass shootings. Either you run, hide, or you fight.
Right.
So if you kind of remember that, if you get into a situation where there's a problem, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a shooting, it could be just a fight. Right?
Exactly.
If a fight breaks out,
Exactly.
in an area where there's a large gathering, the best thing to do is get away from that area.
Right.
Run. If you can't run, then you need to be able, and this goes into what you're talking about, Sam, looking at exits and even places to hide.
Yes.
That you can get cover.
Yes.
Get cover. That's
Exactly.
important.
Yeah.
Not behind a piece of board or
Right.
it has to be something
Solid.
substantial.
Solid,
Exactly. And if you can't do that, if you can't hide, then the last alternative, and this has happened where individuals have encountered people that are either armed or wanting to do some kind of damage, and they've been able to encounter them and stop them.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are the three, but that is the last resort. That is the last resort. So awareness is big.
I think
Right.
so.
Awareness is big.
I think so.
So, all right. So we can't stop our lives, right?
No,
So concerts are going to happen.
of course.
Children are going to go back to school. I want to read some statistics for you. So in Dayton, Ohio, we touched on that, 9 fatalities, 27 injured. El Paso, which was the Walmart shooting, 22 fatalities, 26 injured. The Gilroy Garlic Festival, 3 fatalities, 12. I'm not going to read all of them, but the list goes on and on. In our own backyard, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, 17 fatalities, 17 injured. Texas First Baptist Church, 26 fatalities, 20 injured. The Las Vegas Strip, which was the worst mass shooting, we had 58 people, fatalities, and 546. And the Orlando nightclub, 49 and 53. And let's not forget Sandy Hook Elementary, which is kids 6 to 7 years old. 20 kids died in that. So this is our lives. So yes, we can do those things, which is, run for cover, hide, and
Fight.
last resort, fight for your life, so to speak. But we saw in the Parkland shooting where the police officer, which was there, armed to protect kids, did not enter the building where there was a live shooting. So Tell us what you think about that. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but from a law enforcement perspective, give us some feedback on that.
Well, I think that from a law enforcement perspective, I think that he did not do his job.
Right.
If I were the commander at the time, if I were the sheriff at the time, I would be upset. You know, I would bear some responsibility for that as well, because obviously my thought at that time would be, did I train my deputies properly to do that? You know, why is it that that particular deputy did not enter the school?
Right.
However, you had other officers or deputies that entered, but he didn't. Was it a matter of training, or was it a matter of him just not having the courage to do it? And we could never tell, you know, because I know in the military they say there's no what's the saying? There's no heathens in a foxhole, or you know, everybody that goes into a foxhole at one point they get religion because they're scared, you know,
Right.
and it's just a matter of courage to go out there and fight.
Right.
And we would never know that until the bullets actually start flying. I think a training has a big part of that, as a big part of that. I also think that the mental aptitude that we put into our officers, our law enforcement officers and our deputies has a big part of that. I think our recruiting has a big part of that. I am partial, being a military man, I am partial to having folks that have a military background in law enforcement.
Okay.
I think that helps, especially in situations like this, because that person already has learned the skills of you know, encountering armed individuals, encountering those types of situations. So in some senses that would be second nature.
Very valid point, because I was just going to ask you if you think that that he wasn't able to go into the school simply because he's never had to deal with something like
Correct.
that before.
Correct.
Of course.
Correct.
He's never had to deal with something like that, so he was caught off guard.
Correct.
If he is non-military, like you said, he did not have that experience.
Correct.
And I'm not saying that he was right. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I can put myself in his shoes and see, well, wow, what do I do here? Like totally frozen.
Correct.
Because he's never encountered
Correct.
anything
Now,
like that.
another piece of that also is that he was overwhelmed by firepower.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I don't believe that he had the proper weapon to encounter somebody that had an AR-15 or an assault weapon.
Right.
So that's something that we also have to deal with our officers adequately prepared.
Right.
Do they have the right equipment?
Do we need to fill their hands with assault rifles as
well?
well?
I believe that the criminals have these weapons. I think our military and our law enforcement need to have, well, our military obviously has those types of weapons, but I think our law enforcement should have those types of weapons.
Especially if you're
also.
not putting a ban on it, if
That's
you're not
right.
restricting it, if you're not doing everything that you're supposed to do to get it out of the criminal's hands.
Exactly.
So then why not equip the law enforcement with those assault rifles as well?
Well, I think the first step, I wish that we didn't have to put it.
Of
I mean,
course.
when I started in law enforcement, we didn't have those types of weapons. All right. The most, as far as a long barrel weapon that we would carry is a shotgun. You know, and even that, some of us carried shotguns and some of us didn't. It wasn't a requirement. But we all had our sidearms. We had, revolvers at that time, and then we transitioned into semi-automatic weapons. But that was that time. You know, now we're talking about, AR-15s. You could buy them on the internet.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, from what I understand. So it's a different time, and it requires different measures.
It does.
So we're seeing a lot about people, minorities, so to speak, and I really hate that word, but that's what it's referred to, minorities being attacked more and more. A lot of people have come out and have been very vocal that if our politicians and our president is not hindering or speaking kindly to the world, and saying these things, is encouraging some of this behavior and what we're seeing. So from a law enforcement standpoint, especially because a lot of people, most cops we know are great, right? And are there because they truly love what they do.
Right.
But then you have, I don't know if it's a handful, a basketful, whatever it is, of cops that are pulling over people and targeting people and profiling people. What is the process when someone feels like they've been victimized based on your experience? We file a complaint, and I'm asking because this happened to me personally.
Okay.
As a mom just going to work, pulled over by a bad cop. And, you know, you file a complaint, he didn't turn on like his body camera until after I said I was on the phone with 911, scared for my life. Thankfully I was on the phone with 911 because that's when he backed off from screaming and yelling. But you file a complaint with the police department, it really goes nowhere in our eyes. Can you tell us what really happens? Do you have to have a certain amount of complaints? What do you do with cops that have complaints? And granted, people will file false complaints as well.
Sure.
But when you prove that they are legitimate complaints, where so many people can't file this many complaints, it's not real.
Correct.
What do you do, or what would you like to see change so that people like me feel safe on the road?
Well, there's a couple of questions in that one
No,
question.
right? Absolutely.
First of all, it's within your rights to record that encounter yourself. Okay, so
I did not know.
That's true.
Wow.
Yeah, but I was on the phone with 911.
Wow. So that was a form
You're
of recording.
panicking.
Wow,
So
that
you
is, I
record.
think that's a good, I don't think a lot of people know that. So
That's true.
ladies and gentlemen, did you
You're
hear
well,
that?
You're well within your rights to do
You
that.
are well within your rights
That's
to
right.
record,
That's right.
when they pull you over.
So, as a matter of fact, I think there might be some device on the market. I think it's an app that automatically comes on when you tell Siri, I think I'm being pulled over or something
Wow.
So you
like
can
that.
start
It
recording.
starts
Awesome,
right.
whoever
So
invented that.
check that out. But yeah, you're well within your rights. All right, and that officer cannot tell you to turn off your phone or to turn off your video or anything, unless it's part of a criminal investigation.
Right.
If you're under arrest, that's a whole different thing.
Of course.
Or if they're serving a warrant or something like that. But so that's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is if you make a complaint, all right, a lot of people don't follow up on their complaints. All right. One of the things that during my time in Lauderhill, when I was the chief of police there, and even in BSO, we have what's called red flags. So if a officer or a deputy is getting a number of complaints, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Right.
And that means that, you know what, that person's probably got a problem, and we need to look into it. Either Internal Affairs needs to look into it, or some employee assistance program. Maybe that individual's having psychological difficulties.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah, you never
in their
know.
personal life,
Yeah.
and that's happened.
Of course.
That's happened.
Happens to all of us.
Yeah, I've had officers where they're taking certain medication, and
Right.
they don't, reveal that for whatever reason, and that medication causes them to be aggressive. So those things have to be taken into consideration as well. But it's important that, and as you said, Dawn, that the command has to be looking at that. If the command, from the sergeant on up, if they're not looking at their officers and making sure that their officers are not getting those types of complaints, discourtesy complaints, use of force complaints, things like that, if they're getting those, they need to be addressed. They need to be taken seriously, because what will usually happen if they are not addressed, if they are not investigated, is that officer just gets worse and worse,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
they believe that
They
nothing's
keep getting
done,
away
so they
with
get away with it.
everything, so they
Exactly.
try to get away with even more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I would change, and it's because of the Officers' Bill of Rights, and we have unions that will go to bat for their officers. Sometimes when an officer is charged, with a policy violation and is terminated, right, that officer can go through arbitration to get their job back. And sometimes, and it's happened on numerous occasions,
Oh, I
where
believe
that
you.
officer will get their job back,
Reinstated.
and that's a tough thing.
And they would be
That's a
paid
tough
in the
thing.
process for the time.
Yeah,
lost.
sometimes they are suspended with pay,
Hey, yeah.
and
We've seen it.
that means that
Yeah.
they're basically off the job,
Yeah.
getting-
Relaxing,
getting
getting
paid,
Mhm.
and sometimes they come back.
Mhm.
Once they're fired, they come back on the job, they're reinstated, and they get back pay.
Yeah.
So that happens as well.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing, especially with an officer that may be abusing their authority, is that the command, it's important that the command, whether it be the sheriff or the chief of that department, and everyone underneath them that is in that officer's chain of command, recognizes it, and takes some action to address it.
So you would change that process.
Oh, for sure. Well, when you say change, let me make it clear. It's going to take a while to do that. I think the change is that you realize and you recognize officers that are having problems, and you establish as a leader that you're not going to tolerate that
Yeah.
type of behavior. I think that's the important thing. So when I was in Lauderhill, when I was the chief of police there, those types of things my officers knew. If there's a discourtesy complaint, and as you said, some people will make a complaint just to get out of something. So we'll have an individual that has been in the system, knows the system, and they know that, if I complain against this officer, maybe my case will get thrown out,
Yep.
So we have those as
Yeah.
well. But if you have a number of those types of complaints, or you have complaints from citizens who are just simply being stopped in a traffic stop, that's something that we need to take seriously as a
Yeah.
command. We need to investigate that. And if the officer needs help or the deputy needs help, then get them that help that they need and make sure that they can do their job. And if they simply don't want to do their job, then that officer needs to find another job.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Does
So
that answer your question?
yes.
You can't be abusing the people
No,
that you
no.
have a job to protect.
Exactly.
You cannot.
Exactly.
You cannot.
Exactly. And it's a you're walking a tightrope, because let's face it, nobody wants to see an officer.
Right.
Right? I mean, if you are legitimately, let's say you're speeding, which is the number one thing, right? That's usually how people, encounter
pulled over,
police.
yes.
Yeah, you get
Yes.
pulled over. Or you call,
Right.
911. But
Very
let's say
true.
you get pulled over.
Mhm.
You're going to be aggravated because, it's like, oh gosh, now I got to pay this ticket. It's going to be, whatever. It's not going to be an easy, amount. It's probably going to be $100 or more.
Right.
So
Or
you
you
gotta
might
deal-
be late.
Well-
You might be late for work, or you might be late for somewhere,
Right.
and this cop is pulling you over
Ex-
for speeding,
Exactly.
and you're aggravated. Why is he making me even more late?
Exactly.
So, yes, I
So
get
what's
it.
your
I get
attitude
it.
going
I
to
get
be?
it. Right.
So now we have an officer that's coming up that's doing their job. you're going to give him a ration.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be like, hey, I'm just doing my job,
Job.
you know. So the perception on your part might be a little different.
Yes.
You know,
Your attitude might not be very nice.
Exactly. And sometimes, you know, I've gotten complaints where citizens will say, well, he yelled at me.
Yeah.
Okay, was he stern?
Right.
Did he use, you know, profanity?
Yeah.
How did he yell it? And you know, officer saying, can I see your license and registration and your proof of insurance?
Yeah.
In an aggravated state,
Yes.
that could sound to you like he's yelling at me. You know, why are you yelling at me? You know,
I've
I
thought many
I didn't
times.
do anything
Yes,
wrong, you
I've
know.
thought many times to call and say, well, your officer was mean.
Right, there you go.
He was mean. I would never call to say that. I would never, because mean is basically an interpretation.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm interpreting his tone as mean,
Correct.
but like you said, he's probably simply being stern.
That's right.
He's
Right.
probably
That's
simply
right.
being stern.
So apart from the obvious, though, which we're discussing
And
now,
that's not use of force.
That's
Now, if we're talking about
right.
use of force, that's
In-
that's a
Totally
totally
story.
different story.
in my situation,
Mhm.
not speeding, going 30 miles per hour.
Okay.
The officer didn't even know the speed limit was 35, and
Mhm.
it's just right outside my community.
Mhm.
My biggest fear was because the way he approached me was, I thought someone was trying to kidnap me.
Uh-huh.
He started trying to run me off the road first,
Wow.
and I was, and it's just half an hour show, so we don't want to get, but it was truly a dirty cop situation.
Of course.
So
and that's traumatic.
it was,
Yeah.
because I can tell you, if I was guilty, I would tell you I was guilty. I was
Correct.
speeding, whatever, take the punishment.
Mhm.
I'm not one to give an officer grief
Right.
had I been speeding. Not the case here. So I'm talking for the people that have been truly profiled for whatever reason.
Mhm.
The cop's having a bad day.
Correct.
He needs some additional help or training.
Correct.
People are in fear for their lives. We
For
have
sure.
a lot of people, because whether it's the color of the skin, they're in the wrong place, their sexual preference, that are living in fear every day, not just from killers out there, people with guns,
Mhm.
but also from our law enforcement as
I agree.
well.
I agree.
So, we want to know that if we call a cop, we're protected. I want, if a cop pulls me over, I'm doing something wrong, I'm okay with that.
That's right.
But the abuse of force is like, I want to know that the people, and voting, like you mentioned, is so important to vote the right people in place to make the changes that we want to see as a society.
For sure.
But I want to know where people stand on making sure, even if it's 10 police officers, because 1,000 are doing well
Correct.
and are protecting us as citizens, and we're thankful for that. For those 10 officers, making sure that there are things in place, processes in place to either get them the help they need or kick them off the force because they simply don't belong
I
there.
agree.
And
I
that's
agree
why
with you.
we're paying taxpayers'
I agree.
money.
As from what I heard today, it's not easy to kick anyone off.
Correct.
Not,
Correct.
but at
And-
least the
and-
record.
And I'm not
Correct.
surprised. I'm
It's-
not surprised.
It is difficult, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it starts at the beginning. The recruiting process is
Right.
important.
I agree. I
we
agree with you
need to-
wholeheartedly.
yeah.
So you won't have to go through the kicking off.
Exactly.
You won't have to.
Exactly.
Because your recruiting process was so good.
Exactly.
It was so
and
detailed.
it's you're dealing with individuals that sometimes might be immature emotionally.
Right.
Right.
That's another part of it. I learned about the job that you really have to be a mature individual
Of
to be
course.
a cop, because you deal with so many different situations,
Mm-hmm.
so many different personalities.
Yes.
And you may deal with a violent call one
Mhm.
minute, and then you go to somebody who simply wants a report because their license plate was stolen.
Right.
And you kind of have to bring yourself down emotionally from that violent encounter that you just was involved in 10 minutes ago.
To help grandma.
To now, exactly.
You have to bring a
So-
different version of yourself
Exactly.
to deal with this.
And a part of that is you
situation.
need to be a mature individual to
To
do,
be
or you
able
have
to
to
do
learn to do that. And sometimes it takes a process of learning, you know.
Mhm.
Now, I want to make this a caveat. That's got nothing to do with being racist, you know, using profanity, abusing anyone, abusing your authority, using excessive force, things like that. That should not be tolerated at all. But I just want to give you that perspective of what it's like to be an officer sometimes in today's, when you're talking about communities that are very active, where there's a lot of calls for service and things like that, you know, you're going up and down. Your adrenaline is going up and down. And, you know, sometimes you have to be, as an officer, you have to be aware. We talk about awareness,
Yes.
you know, just for the public. So you can imagine an officer who's going into a dangerous
Yes.
situation and how, you know, aware
He
and
actually
they
has
have
to
to
be.
be,
Yeah.
you know.
And sometimes
prepared.
they're not even mentally prepared. They
And
go
prepared.
to help someone, and next
Exactly.
thing they know, they're in a gunfight. So
Exactly.
absolutely.
But yeah, I want to make sure that I make that clear. There's a
Yeah.
distinction, though we're not gonna. I'm not gonna tolerate anyone abusing people or being racist or anything like that. That's
Absolutely.
Not,
So, Mary Quinn says, as a white woman, I couldn't imagine having a young black son in this day and age. Many, not all cops shoot first and ask questions later. When it's a black man they pull over, it's horrific and scary. Racism is alive and well, and it makes me sick.
yeah.
And that's from Mary, one of our viewers. Thank you for that, Mary. Great point. And that's the fear that we're talking about, that people are living with. And there's so many people, no matter what color you are, that you realize the injustice against, you know, certain races and cultures or sexual preferences out there. And we want to make sure that the people we're voting and electing in are the right people, to make sure there's a zero tolerance on some of this
For
as
sure.
well.
For sure.
One of the things that I found that I found with cops shooting first or these deaths, I remind my son. I say to him all the time. I said, and my daughter, because she could have some attitude as well. I worry about them having attitudes if the cop pulls them over for speeding.
For sure.
And I tell them, I said, just be very respectful.
Mhm.
Be beyond respectful, even if the officer is giving you a hard time.
Mhm.
Just kill him with respect.
Mhm.
Kill him with respect.
Mhm.
I don't want you to give him back an attitude.
Correct.
Okay, he pulls you over, he's giving you an attitude. You don't need to give that back to him. You don't need to do that. You be very respectful and hope for the best, pray for the best. I see that I know that there are bad cops out there. I know
Yes.
that there are bad officers out there. But I know that there are officers that are probably fearful of their lives
Mhm.
when they pull over someone. And if someone is giving them a lot of like pushback,
Mhm.
I could see why they would feel like they have to like protect themselves or do something stupid.
Mhm.
So I advise my children just be respectful, be very
I
respectful.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree. You know, one of the things, we have to have respect on both sides.
Very
Okay.
true.
So I appreciate that you do that as a
Mhm.
parent,
Mhm.
and I think that is good advice
Mhm.
for parents. But as a law enforcement officer and as a law enforcement leader, I have to have that talk with my officers
Yes.
and my deputies.
Respect
That you know,
us.
there is and you know, I had a instructor when I was going through the academy, and he told me this, and it stuck with me, that you already have, as a law enforcement officer, you have the upper hand.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You have the badge, you have the authority, you have the presence, all right? You already have the upper hand.
Mhm.
You don't need more than that unless you're receiving more than
Yes.
that,
Right.
okay?
Yes.
So that is something that we need to instill in our officers and our deputies, that you know, just by your mere presence, right? And I get it too,
Mhm.
as you know, I've been in law enforcement for 24 years,
Right.
right? And if a cop pulls me over, or if a cop comes up behind me,
Right.
I get scared.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
Your heart
and
starts
yeah,
racing.
and that's me. That's
Yeah.
been one.
Yeah.
You know. So there is that fear there.
Mm-hmm.
I hate the fact that our community has to be fearful of the
Yeah.
police. That's not what we're there for. We're not an occupying force.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're truly here to protect,
Mm-hmm.
and we're truly here to serve the people. That's what we're about. When you call an officer, you're looking for somebody to help you
Yeah.
with a situation.
Yeah.
And if we can get that type of mentality back into our officers, that, hey, listen, you know, when that person calls you, and you know, something else is, when that thing happens that causes you to call the police, that's probably the most significant thing that's happened to you maybe in your life ever.
Right.
Right?
Thank you.
But certainly at that time.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're not looking for somebody to either not take it seriously
Mm-hmm.
or to, you know, ramp up your feelings. You need somebody there that's going to say, okay, well, how can I help this
Thank
person?
you.
You know,
Yeah.
so we need to. That's something that I truly feel
Yeah.
we need to instill. In
Yeah,
our
your
officers.
approach.
Yeah.
You need to
And
work on their
consistent-
approach. Yes.
consistently.
Yeah.
Because that's something that's easy to forget.
Yes.
Because you deal with, you know, unfortunately, you know, you deal with people at their worst
Yes.
sometimes.
Very well
So-
said.
And-
Very,
and,
very
you
well
know,
said.
I think-
So you have to bring your best.
You
You're
have to
dealing
bring-
with people at their worst, so you
Correct.
have to bring your
Correct.
best. This is why you're here.
Correct.
This is
And
why
I-
we called you. This is
That's
why.
just consistent.
Yes.
So I think we all agree that police are in a tough situation
It is.
because
Right.
their lives are at risk. They don't know the situation they're getting into, just probably some quick details. We're seen as a society where people are being profiled, people are being targeted. So the fears is increasing when
sure.
a cop car is coming.
For sure.
I know based on my situation that I lived in fear for a long, long time because I thought about if this happened to me, thank God it was me and not one of my kids.
Yes.
And I said, thank God it happened, and I had the brain power to call 911, and I was able to tell that officer I have 911 on the phone, and that's when he retrieved. So if I hadn't gone through that, we talk about it every day. We see the videos of people being abused. The couple just walk up and slap someone in their face, and it's caught on camera. And that seems to be the only time the officer really gets reprimanded, because at the end of the day, it's my word against your words, even though I may come across as a normal, calm woman.
Right.
But with the fears between being pulled over and not knowing, the increase in our fears and our anxiety, we're already talking about mental illness for our young children and adults, and guns and committing suicide. So people are living. If you are not a strong person, I don't know how you get through your day when you think of all the things that you have to go through.
Correct.
So what would you say to people? What message do you want people to hear from you about police officers and your vision of what you would like to see to help us?
Well, my vision, and that's important. I'm glad you said that. You know, what's my why?
Yeah.
And my why is that I don't want this type of conversation to have to happen when it comes to law enforcement.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to hear that my deputies or my officers are instilling fear in the public, you know, by not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Or children, you know, instilling fear in children. I think we have to get back to that period of time where our officers are truly protectors, are truly guardians, you know, and for the good people, all right? And we can be guardians for the good people by locking up the bad people too. Right?
Absolutely,
Because
we do need
that's
law
all.
enforcement.
That's all part of it, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, when we look at, you know, people that live in fear in some of our communities, they're living in fear not necessarily because of the police, but because of the criminals that are out there in the streets. So I think that's important as well. You know, my vision for the sheriff's office is one that is not only technologically driven, because we're living in a technological society. Social media, I mean, this is social media right here, right?
Yeah.
Social media drives
Huge.
a lot of what we do.
Huge.
And this is where our children are spending most of their time.
Mm-hmm.
This is also where the criminals are spending their time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that is something that we really need to start trying to get a hold of. Cybersecurity, cyber technology.
Oh, yeah.
That's big because so much activity occurs on there that we don't even think about. We're here talking about traffic stops and things like that, but there's a lot of activities that are detrimental to our safety, to our children.
People are able to buy guns online.
Everything, not even guns. I mean, how about, you know, our pedophiles?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, we haven't even talked about that. You know, I mean, just
So let's
that
touch on that briefly.
that
Where
whole-
do you envision?
Oh my gosh! Well, there's so much activity that's going on that we can't even control. You know,
No, you can't.
That's
It's
on
out of
the-
your
on the
control. I
dark,
believe you.
on the dark web.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
You
I
know,
believe you.
we're talking about, you know, selling narcotics.
Mm-hmm.
Did you you heard about the story where there was a college, I think it was on a college campus, where this kid was actually dealing drugs online, and he would set it up, you know, where everything was done online. You could buy your drugs online. And
I'm not
well, that's
surprised.
the kind
Not
of stuff that
surprised.
we're dealing
Yeah.
with now, because our children are computer savvy.
Yes.
That's where they
More
spend.
computer savvy than we are.
That's where they spend their
Mhm.
time. You know, so that is something that we definitely have to be visionary about, especially when it comes in law enforcement.
Right.
You know, we talk about just safety in general. You know, whether it be safety in our schools, safety in public places. You know, we have to just either through education, awareness, or having officers that are just, you know, equipped to deal with those types of situations. That's important. You know, that's part of my vision.
Let me
So
ask you something. As you said, having the officers, as you brought up, having the officers that are equipped.
Yes.
Have you ever had to fire your gun?
No.
Have you ever?
Not in
law enforcement.
That's right. Not in a threatening manner.
Wow,
No.
that's a good thing.
It is.
That is a very
It
good
is.
thing.
It is.
Yeah.
I've had to pull my gun
Okay.
in several
Right.
situations. in
But
several
never
instances.
had to fire.
But never had to fire it, you know, in a threatening manner, or to, you know, fire it at someone. So
I'm glad.
Thank God for
Because
that.
that I'm
Thank God
sure
for
that could be a little bit
Of
traumatic.
course, it's traumatic.
Yes.
Of course, you know,
Yeah.
officers and deputies who fire their guns, especially if they, you know, unfortunately kill someone.
Yes.
You know, it's very traumatic.
Yeah,
It's very traumatic.
I'm sure.
But you know, that's part of what we do. That's part of what we
Part of
do.
your job.
That's part of the
Part
job.
of what you were trained to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that it's probably a testament that I didn't have to, even though I was put in those types of situations
Yeah.
where, you know, things
Yeah.
could have gone wrong. I remember clearly walking up on, you talk about traffic stops, walking up on a vehicle that had 4 individuals in it, and this was an area that was, we would say, one of your better areas, okay, because we
Right.
always think
Right.
that these
Yeah.
things only
Happens
happen
everywhere.
in the
Bad
in the
area.
hood, or
Yes.
whatever we want to,
Yeah.
what designator we want to put on
Yeah.
on certain areas. But this was in a upscale neighborhood, and there were 4 individuals in the car, and I was by myself, and this was at night. And I walked up on this vehicle, and I didn't know it, but the individual in the rear seat had a gun on them. And that taught me right away. If it didn't at that time, it certainly did after, that every vehicle in Florida has the potential to have
having
an
a-
armed
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Because it's just, it's so
Yeah.
commonplace.
So many
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
have guns
Yeah.
and are
Yeah, and now I thought about that. You know, here I am. You know, I'm not thinking that, you know, I have to be, you know, prepared to fire back.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm fired upon.
Right.
but that situation could have easily presented itself.
Were you young? Were you
I
young
was a
in
young
your
deputy.
career?
Yes,
Right,
I was a young
okay.
deputy.
So your mindset obviously was changed.
That's
after
right.
that.
I was on the beach in on A1A in a city by the name of Lauderdale by the Sea, because I started out in Pompano. I started out in unincorporated Pompano, and part of that area on A1A was actually unincorporated, just south of Atlantic Boulevard.
Okay.
I remember it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
like yesterday. You remembered like
I remember how
yesterday.
scared I was.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I also hope domestic violence is on the
Yeah.
top of your list.
Yes, it is always.
I know, the statistics, and statistics vary depending who you're getting them from, but approximately
Always.
50 a month
Always.
die in their home from domestic violence,
Always.
which leads to a lot of the other social issues that we're seeing as well.
Always. But let me touch on domestic violence a bit, because that's a good topic. When I first started in law enforcement, we didn't have the state prosecute that could be the prosecutors of domestic violence. So in other words, it would be up to the victim,
Right.
which in most cases was the woman,
To file
to
the
prosecute,
charges.
to file,
Yeah.
file
Right.
the charges,
Yeah.
and have the state attorney prosecute. But while I've been in law enforcement, they've actually changed the law where the state can actually file and prosecute on behalf of the victim, which is a good thing. That's a good step.
And that's usually
Because-
if there's a physical, you see
Well,
it
yes.
physical, right?
There's certain requirements for domestic
Okay.
violence as far as an arrest being made. There has to be, some kind of violent act. So if there's evidence of violence, if I come into your home and your furniture is broken, even though you may not have been harmed or you may not show physical violence, then that still can be considered
Yeah,
a
because
domestic
it shows
violence.
an unsafe environment.
Correct. So I think that was a good move, and that was brought about because of like Women in Distress and groups like that. They just got tired of these women being injured
Victims.
severely and
Yeah.
I
fatally.
agree.
Because what happens too, I remember that domestic violence, unfortunately, it's insidious because the woman feels, in most cases, it's a woman victim. The woman feels that she is captive. Okay, so that individual, if it's a male partner or husband or whatever it is usually the breadwinner. If that person is in jail, then they can't support the family.
Yes.
So a lot of times what would happen is, after a night where the woman recovers and realizes this, then she would refuse to press charges.
Yep.
So the
Yeah.
situation would continue. So
Yeah.
I think having the state step up and say, well, you know what, we are going to press charges on behalf of these victims when it's a domestic violence case is something that really took it to the next level. And officers and law enforcement started taking it more seriously as well. So now, even if there is no arrest made, there's a report made, which shows that this is a continuing thing. So down the road, let's say the woman wants to get a restraint order, those reports are on file that you can show the judge. This is a continuous thing.
But
So
I
that
think
helps
even
as well.
beyond the financial aspect that you talk about, I think mentally, if you're in an abusive situation, the fear of just going out there and being on your own, even if you have help,
Right.
women or men abused will turn that help down because they just don't want to leave. Somehow, mentally, they've been beaten down for so
Correct.
long, they just don't know how to pull themselves out of it.
Correct.
And-
It's insidious. Domestic violence is,
Yeah.
there's so many of those types of crimes that it's really slavery. When you talk about
It's mental.
human
Yeah.
trafficking,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
another form of slavery. When you have young kids who are put into different environments where they have to work. It could be something as simple as, somebody working within the home. We've had
Whole
cases
different
like
show.
that, right?
Whole different show. Domestic violence, human trafficking, slavery, a whole different show.
It's
We have
awful.
gone way over our time discussing topics that were not really appointed for this show, but all very good information
Well,
to
I'm
have.
glad you asked me about
all
it.
very good information to have. For final thoughts for our viewers.
Well, I think that, these are some of the topics. Obviously, you can see where my heart is. I'm a law enforcement officer. Not only do I have a heart towards, the victims and towards making sure that we do police in the proper manner, but also I have a heart for the law enforcement officers if they're doing the job the right way.
Yes, so do I.
So I can support them, when we're doing the job the right way, because that's what it's all about. That's what law enforcement is all about. That's a philosophy I've always had, and that's something that I always take with me. My vision is to take the sheriff's office to the next level. I think integrity is important. I think taking responsibility for your actions is important. I think if we see something that's broken, that we fix it.
We
that
try
we,
to
that
anyway.
we admit to it.
Yes.
We admit to it and we try to fix it. That's correct. And I think all of those things are important. And that's the reason why I'm running for sheriff. And my website, if you so choose to come and check me out, my platform is on the website. It's Smalling for Sheriff, SMALLING FOR sheriff.com. And next Monday, which is August 19th at 7 p.m., we're having a town hall at my church to discuss safety measures, some of the things that we talked about in this program, and personal safety.
Awesome.
My church is New Life Fellowship Center, and
Where is it?
I have my card here. It is at New Life Fellowship Center's 8720 Northwest 44th Street. That's in Sunrise. It's right at the corner of Pine Island and 44th Street. It's in that plaza right there. And it's a big auditorium, so we can hold 200-300 people. So you're welcome to come out to that. That's going to be at 7 p.m. Monday night. And my bishop is Bishop Clinton Reddick, so I'm going to give him a shout out.
We're going to share this too. We're going to share the link and everything as well. And we're going to also invite you to go in and respond to a lot of our viewer comments, because unfortunately a lot of them aren't popping up for us to read them, to ask you as well. One of my closing thoughts is, I think these conversations must happen.
For sure.
And we're glad that you're here, because I think the community and our outcry, our disappointment, our anger, if we can project that well to you as a leader in our community to help enforce change. So I want to see more of this. I want to see more conversations, more listening to the people that law enforcement represents. So that will be my my take to you is whatever we can do as a community to give you that feedback, especially using social media is just awesome. My closing quote is, individually we're one drop, but together we're an ocean. And someone sent me that quote today, and it's so powerful, because together we can overcome so much.
For sure.
Any final thoughts, Ms. Sherilyn?
No, I think this was a very informative show. We thank you for coming on here. In response to you, strength in numbers.
Yeah.
I've always believed that together, stronger together. I think I've seen that hashtag almost everywhere, and I truly believe that. Yeah. Together we are.
And we pray for all the children going back to school, and that we can, and when we go out, we just want to live life, because we have one life to live, and we just don't want to be restrained. So I think as a society we can do so much better.
Awareness. I want to stress that to everyone. Awareness. Just be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of where you are. Be aware of who you are with. Just
Yeah,
be aware.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And vote.
Vote.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We need to
Exercise your rights.
Your rights.
we need to
Exercise
vote
your right.
leaders in that have our best interest at heart. We need to stop kowtowing to individuals that tell us one thing and do something
Thank
else.
you. All talk and no action.
We need to stop just going to the popular people and really start listening, as you said, Don. Listen to our leaders. Talk to them. Ask them the hard questions.
Mhm.
You know, do you support gun control?
Right.
Do you, whatever it is that you are interested in, ask those hard questions
Yeah.
and see what their answers
Yeah.
are.
Whatever
you know?
change you want to
Right.
see,
Right.
find out if that person is on your same page.
Exactly.
And vote them in.
And look at their record. Because most of our leaders, I can tell you, I have 24 years of law enforcement. I've got more than that because I've got military experience. I'm currently in the educational environment because I'm an associate dean at Broward College in criminal justice. So I have a track record. And it's easy for you to look up my track record, Google me, ask people about me. It's important that we do that.
The research.
And do the research
Yeah.
and not just vote for somebody because
Just
they're
because
popular
they said,
or they
or
said
they made
that.
one statement that you truly like. Oh, I like
Exactly.
him. I'm gonna vote.
Exactly.
No, look at the track record. Is
Exactly.
what you're saying. Do your research.
Do your research.
Do your research.
Very important.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Caribbean Edge. We so appreciate you. Keep your comments coming, and we'll go ahead and make sure we get some answers for you. Thank you again for joining
Ciao
us.
for now and take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy it.
Bye.
Bye bye.